Hello students, good morning. Myself D.K Verma from Santiniketan Jubilee School Motihari. Students, this is our first lecture of 10th Economics Chapter 2 Federalism. Students, it is quite clear that we are under democracy, and whenever we think about democracy, we think about powers. We think about division of powers. We think about two or more levels of the government. Students, it is because democracy is based on the principle of division of powers. And as we all know that India is a true example of democracy, that is why it is quite necessary for us to study well about federalism. Actually, what is federalism, students? This is the first question before us, and in this regard, the answer is federalism is a system of government in which power is divided between a central authority and various constituent units of the country. Once again, federalism is a system of government in which powers are divided between a central authority and various constituent units of the country. Students, whenever we discuss this definition of federalism, we come to know that various constituent units of the country means different states. It is because in a true federal nation, at least there are two levels of the government. Number one, central government. Number two, state governments, means the provincial governments. Students, it is because without a federal system, we can't imagine about democracy. Because federalism is actually a system of the division of political powers among different levels of the government. And most of all, under federalism, we discuss about powers of different levels of the government which are clearly specified in the constitution of the country. So students, it is quite clear that India is an example of federal system, and it is because in the constitution of our country there is existence of the central government, state governments, as well as local self-governments. So, it is now very clear that India is a federal nation. But another question arises here, students, and that is, what is the other form of government existing in some of the nations of the world? As we are discussing about federal system in our country, so it is also our duty to discuss about another form of government prevailing in some of the nations of the world. So, besides federal system, we come to know that there is also another form of government in some of the countries of the world, and that is unitary government. Whenever we talk about unitary government, we talk about a system of government in which there is only one form or level of the government in whole of the country, that is the elected government. England is an example of unitary system of government, because in England, for whole of the country, there is election of the formation of the central government only. State governments are not the elected governments. Actually, state governments, which are also known as the provincial governments, are the nominated governments by the central government. They have got their powers and positions as given by the central government. So, state governments are not the elected governments. They can't do as they wish. They have to work as per guidelines and directives of the central government, as well as they get the resources and powers from the central government. So, state governments means the provincial governments in a unitary form of the government like England is not a form of government which is responsible before its people, because this type of government is not the elected government. So, this type of government that is nominated by the central government has to work as per the guidelines and instructions of the central government. These provincial governments in England get their resources and powers from the central government. But here in the federal system of government that exists in our country, India, we get that not only the central government but also the provincial governments are the elected governments. So, students, each level of the government has got its jurisdictions in the constitution, has got its resources and powers in the government. It is another matter that in Indian federal system of the government, state governments have got less powers than the central government, and central government has got more powers than the state governments. That is another thing of the discussion. But here we have to proceed just to know about some of the key features of federalism in India. Students, some key features of federalism in India are as follows. Number one, there are two or more levels of the government in a federal system like India. Students, whenever we talk about two or more levels of the government in Indian federal system, we talk about the existence of central government, state governments, and local self-governments. Central government is also an elected government, state governments are also elected governments, and local self-governments are also elected bodies. And the same citizens elect all levels of the government. So, in a true federal system like India, there are two or more levels of the government. That is a key feature of Indian Federation. Second, different levels or tiers of the government govern the same citizens, but each has its jurisdictions on specified matters such as legislation, taxation, and administration. We have to discuss this very point here. Students, this is the second key feature of Indian Federation. It is now very clear from the second key feature of Indian Federation that different levels of the government govern the same citizens. What is the meaning of this statement? Students, it is quite clear that central government, state governments govern the same citizens, means rule over the same citizens. Central government work for the same citizens, state governments also work for the same citizens. Central government works for the same citizens, govern same citizens, state governments also govern same citizens. But each level of the government has got its jurisdiction on specified matters as discussed in the Constitution. And what are those matters? Students, those issues or subjects of work for each and every level of government are legislation. Legislation means law making. Central government makes laws on specific matters which are important for the nation and which are of the national importance, like banking, currency, railway, communication, and so on. Because we have got that there are 97 subjects of the union list over which only central government can make laws. State governments make laws on some subjects of the state importance, such as land revenue, law and order, police, and so on. And the total number of subjects of the state list are 66. So, students, whenever we are talking about the matters of legislation, it becomes very clear that the fields of making laws are different for the central government as well as for the state governments. Take another subject, taxation. Yes, in a federal nation, the fields of taxation are also specified for the central government as well as state governments. Central government has its fields to collect revenues from railway, communication, national highways, and so on. But the state governments have got their jurisdictions on the matters of taxation from other fields such as land revenue, registry field, and so on. So, fields of taxation, fields of collection of revenues are also separate, specified in favor of the central government as well as in favor of the state governments. And also on the matters of administration, fields are specified in favor of the central government as well as state governments. Central government can work on some issues, subjects of the national importance. Central government creates some policies in favor of the citizens of the nation, and the subjects are of the national importance. Similarly, state governments also can work on the matters of the state importance. So, whether it is the matter of taxation, legislation, or administration, central government, state government have got separate fields on the matters of lawmaking, administration, and collection of revenues. So, this is the second key feature of Indian Federation. Let us know about the third key feature of Indian Federation. Students, this is their jurisdictions are specified in the Constitution. Their jurisdictions means the jurisdictions of the central government as well as state governments on fields of work are not orally specified in the Constitution, but they are written in the Constitution. Orally, central government and state governments can't work on some fields of work. Actually, whenever our Constitution was made, under the federal system and principle of the country, it was then decided that the subjects of work in favor of the central government as well as the subjects of work in favor of the state governments would be clearly specified so that there could be no conflict or any tussle between both levels of the government. Why? It is because our federal principle could run very nicely. Our federal system could work very nicely, and there can be a situation of coordination and help between both types of the levels, both types of the governments, so that our federalism can be presented in a very nice way as well as accommodation of the society and nation could be made better. So, the jurisdiction of each level of the government, I mean in favor of the central government as well as in favor of the state governments, are specified in the constitution. Means the jurisdiction. Here jurisdiction means legal field of work in favor of the central government and in favor of the state governments are clearly specified in the constitution, students. That is why there can't be any situation of conflict between both levels of the government. And after this, another key feature comes forward, and that is fundamental provisions can't be changed unilaterally. Fundamental provisions of the constitution means what? Fundamental provisions of the constitution means India is a federal nation. If it is to be transferred into unitary system, this is the fundamental subject. India has got, or Indians have got 6 fundamental rights. So these fundamental rights are also the fundamental provisions of the constitution. India is an example of parliamentary system of the government. If it is going to be converted into presidential form of the government, this is also a fundamental provision. So if there needs any type of changes in such matters, only one level of the government can't do so. If such changes are possible and are needed in the country, then consent of both levels of the government, central government and state governments are needed. So, these are called fundamental provisions of the constitution. If India or Indian secularism is going to be transferred into another type of ism, then this is also a fundamental provision. So, on important subjects, on important sole basis components of the constitution, if any type of change is needed, if any type of change is felt and it is necessary, then this can't be done by only one level of the government in the constitution, whether it is the central government or the state government. So, students, if such matters become necessary for changes in the constitution, then they must get approval from the central government as well as the state governments after making certain laws. So this is known as fundamental provisions of the constitution, which should be changed after the consent of the central government as well as state governments. And this is a basic key feature of Indian federalism. After this, students, here is another key feature of federalism, and that is courts have the powers to interpret the constitution and powers of the different levels of the government. Courts are powerful in Indian federal system. Courts are powerful organs of the government which can interpret the constitution. Means if there are some conflicts or some issues related to our constitution, then these are courts in India which can decide the matters. Take an example on the issue of Ram Janmabhoomi. In the previous month, Supreme Court of India decided that the very spot of prey was basically the spot of prey to God Ram. So, after the decision of the Supreme Court on Ram Janmabhoomi issue, it was made very clear for all the people, for all the sections of the society, that the very place was related to God Ram and is also related to God Ram. And after that, the conflict was ended. So, such types of matters which become controversial among us can be decided by the Supreme Court of India, after which there can't be any dispute. So, courts have the power to interpret the constitution and powers of each level of the government. There are some matters, there have been some matters in our country when state governments as well as central government both conflicted with each other on the matters of jurisdiction, subjects, but every time Supreme Court as well as high courts on specific matters decided and made it clear that the matters were belonging to some certain types of people, some certain level of the government. So whenever there are matters of controversies on some subjects between two different levels of the government, such as central government as well as a state government, or two different state governments, then the matters are resolved after the decision of the Supreme Court or High Court. So, this is also a key feature of Indian federalism, that courts have the power to interpret the constitution as well as powers of the different levels of the government. Means, after the decision of the court, now it becomes very clear that what and how the matters have been discussed in the constitution and in favor of which level of the government. Similarly, on different issues, central government as well as state governments which come forward in the conflicting nature, after the decision of the government, after the decision of the court, it becomes very clear that whose position is strong on that very issue. So this is a basic key feature of our federalism, that courts are powerful and can interpret the constitution as well as jurisdictions of central government, state governments, and so on. After this, another key feature of Indian federation is here. Sources of revenue are also specified in the constitution. Sources of revenue are also specified in the constitution. Means what? Central government has its sources of revenue in whole of the country on specific subjects of departments, such as railways, communication, and so on. Whatever the revenue is there, that is all in favor of the central government. State governments can't claim over that. Similarly, state governments have their also fields of sources of revenue, such as land revenue, registration of land and houses, and so on. So, in our federal system of the government, sources of revenue are specified in the constitution in favor of the central government as well as the state government, so that there could be no problem in the functioning of our federal system of the government, our federal system of the state. And after that, it has dual objectives, means our federal system has its dual objectives. Number one, to promote its unity and integrity of the country, and number two, to accommodate the regional diversity. After all discussion, students, in this lecture class, it has become very clear that in our federal system of the government, in the constitution, central government is more powerful than the state governments, and state governments are less powerful than the central government. And that is why the first objective of all this discussion in favor of the federal principle or system of the nation, of the government, the first objective that comes forward is just to promote the unity and integrity of our country, of our society. And for that, both work with each other with mutual understanding and support, keeping their rights and resources separately, and have also faith on each other. And in case of any conflict, there are courts to decide the matters. Second objective is to tell that the second objective of our federal system is to accommodate the regional diversity. Yes, it is a very important matter of discussion, students. Regional diversity, accommodation of regional diversity means what? Just to combine culture, civilization, language, way of living of different types of people living at different places. India is a country of diversity, but it is also clear that India is a country of unity in diversity. So, our objective here is just to combine whole of the society with all recognition, religion, caste, language, ethnicity, culture, wearing habits, and so on. Thank you very much, students. We would discuss other topics from this chapter, Federalism, of class 10th, in the next class. For the timing, have a nice day.